What's up? Let's talk about some most people don't know about. This is the truth behind Michael Jackson and his boxing roots. A lot of you may not have known, but once again, I'm right in the middle of a situation. My dad is from East Chicago, and they were basically neighbors of the Jacksons, their whole family. So the Jackson 5, because back in those days, they had music in schools. So a lot of people had bands, and if you had a family, my uncles had a band called the Chambers of Time. And all my uncles was in the band, our cousin was in the band. Everybody could play an instrument. And they had these talent shows, they go on stage and they do these performances. But before that even took place, the first family to ever really do this were the Jacksons. So before we had the Cosby Show, before we had Good Times, we had the Jacksons. The Jackson 5 is what brought that into prominence. They were like the first family on television that you ever knew about. But before they even met, Joe Jackson, who's from East Chicago, Indiana, where, like I just mentioned, my dad's from, and they knew the Jacksons, all the family there. And you got his wife, who's from Catherine. She lived in East Chicago, Indiana. So before they even met, Joe was working at a steel mill. You know, he married another chick, and he was a Golden Gloves boxer. A lot of people didn't know that. Joe Jackson, Golden Glove boxer in East Chicago, Indiana. And he wanted to be a professional boxer. You know, watching Muhammad Ali and all these other fighters at the time coming up, and you seeing Don King was on the rise at this time. You know, and then when he got divorced and he married Catherine, Michael Jackson, the mom, he gave up boxing. He just like, forget it. I'm not finna box no more. I'm just finna be a family man and just still work at the steel yard over there in Inland. So, with this being done and with this being said, he was already in line to do that. But then when the kids, years later, when he gave up on his dream of fighting, and the kids came, naturally he started training them into being musicians and doing, being stars. He came up with the idea of doing that. But his heart, Joe Jackson's heart, was in the boxing. He was in there training them to box. Jermaine, he was teaching them how to jab, 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 pop, pop, pop. He was teaching them how to be fighters first. A lot of people didn't know that. He had them running, training, getting in shape. And then the mom was like, my sons are not going to fight. That's just out. They're not going to fight. And she would fight him on that, and, that was that. But when he came up with the idea that they finna be professional singers, and he managing a band, that's when it took his place, and the Jacksons blew up, and they bigger than life. And at this time, once the Jackson 5 blew up, and Michael's getting ready to come out and do his thing with Thriller, and Thriller's the biggest album in the world, the Jacksons had this tour coming up. And the tour was called the Victory Tour. And this was Michael doing this tour he didn't want to do in the first place, but he did it to aid his brothers. Because even though Michael was leaving, his brothers, they didn't have anything. He just kind of up and left the Jacksons. So it's like, do it for them. Do it for your brothers. We know you got new things going and you're going in another direction with your music. At least do this tour for your brothers so they'll be set for life. So he agreed to do the tour. Well, they waiting on Michael to do some Thriller stuff and do all these other shows. It was his last tour he was doing with his brothers. So what happened was, everything is going like monumental. It's happening so fast for Joe being the main guy in control of everything and all this decision making. To headline the tour, he was going to do it himself, but he needed somebody to help him promote it and get the sponsors and do everything else. So the only guy Joe trusted was the guy he looked up to, Don King. And he went to Don and said, Don, we got these offers from all these clothing lines, Pepsi, and they had Coca-Cola. All these people, the Coca-Cola company offered a large sum of money for Michael Jackson. And Don was able to use that to leverage to get Michael Jackson in a bigger endorsement from Pepsi. And Pepsi is like, you know what, we're going to do the whole tour for Michael Jackson. We're going to do a commercial, it's going to be monumental. And you see, that's how Michael ended up getting scarred and burned on the tour, the set with the fireworks and stuff that you saw later on. But what you didn't know is that after this, Don King was involved in a lot of transactions that happened with the Jackson 5. Meaning that throughout the 90s, through the Mike Tyson era, through fights with Sugar Ray Leonard, Michael Jackson was the main focus, him and Joe Jackson, at these events and at these fights. Michael was a silent investor, him and Joe Jackson, in a lot of these fights. As silent promoters, they didn't want their name attached to it because Michael, he's just like, it's so violent, but the energy, like he feels the energy from being at the fight. So he would always attend the fights, but he didn't want to be seen. So sometimes he'll come there with Don and make an appearance, and he'll meet all the fighters. Like, he loves Sugar Ray Leonard. Sugar Ray Leonard is like one of Michael Jackson's favorite fighters to watch. You know, he loves Sugar Ray Leonard. So, you know, over the years, Michael Jackson was still into boxing. And when he went to the UK, he put on a performance, and he did a deal where he would have the Prince Nazim Ahmed. They did it. Michael do a concert, and then the fight will be after the concert with the Prince. They'll do a dual promotion. Michael Jackson was involved in that, and a lot of people didn't know that he promoted silently a lot of boxing fights of people, and they didn't even know Michael Jackson had anything to do with it. And Joe Jackson, and that's why Joe Jackson in his day had got with the investment group to try to promote the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight. Michael Jackson was deeply rooted into boxing. Even though he just was like, man, I can't be too close to the ring. Like, he didn't want to be sitting ringside because it's so violent. He's just like, oh, it's brutal. But he's like, it's a skill in it. He liked Sugar Ray Leonard, you know, his style of fighting. So, and the Prince, he loved to see the Prince do his thing in the ring, the way he moves around. So, you know, those are the ones I know. I know he liked Mike Tyson too. He saw Tyson like, my God, he's a brute. So, besides all that, that's about all I knew about that boxing situation. But it existed and no one talked about it. Like, no one really spoke on it. So I said, well, I might as well speak on it then. So keep y'all entertained for a little bit. But I'm out. Deuces.